We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
In Florida, they're about to start the countdown for the maiden flight next week of the new Space Shuttle Discovery. It'll be America's 12th shuttle flight and will lift off from the Kennedy Space Center on a 7-day mission. The crew of 6 includes America's second woman astronaut.
The Shuttle Discovery is the first one to be wrapped in a new kind of heat blanket, which makes it much lighter than its sister ships Challenger and Columbia. It's largely replaced the costly and relatively cumbersome process of sticking small, individually made heat tiles to the shuttle's outer skin. The blanket has been placed over the payload doors and parts of the fuselage and wings. It will allow the shuttle to withstand greater heat loads during re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere, where air friction can create temperatures as high as 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, as the shuttle slows down from an orbital speed of 17,500 miles an hour. A unique feature of this mission will be the deployment of this solar array, which, when fully elevated, will stand some 100 feet above the shuttle's cargo bay. Arrays like these will be used to power the space stations of the future. The mission will also see the deployment of a communications satellite, which will be spun out of the cargo bay like a frisbee, the first time such a technique will have been tried.
The crew of the Discovery will be America's second space woman and the first fare-paying passenger. He's a research engineer who will be doing tests in weightless conditions on a top-secret new medical product. From Florida, Bob Friend reports.
With only hours left to blast off, the astronauts who will take the Shuttle Discovery into space went flying together, the conventional way. Amongst Discovery's crew is Dr. Judy Resnik, who will become America's second woman in space. Also on board, the husband of Sally Ride, the first American woman to make the trip. During the flight, the astronauts plan to launch a military communications satellite and experiment with a retractable solar generator, which, if successful, may be used to provide power for future space stations. Space's first fare-paying passenger will be on board too. Engineer Charles Walker will be using the weightlessness of space to test a new drug. At the moment, space agency officials are optimistic that Discovery will take off on time.
And the blast-off is scheduled for just before 1:45, and you can see it in a special report on BBC 2 at 2 o'clock.
Because only 4 of the 5 computers on board agreed with each other. It was the 12th flight of the shuttle program, but the problem was similar to the one which grounded the very first flight back in 1981. Michael Sullivan reports.
As is customary, some of the astronauts limbered up for their space flight in their personal runabout, a civilian version of one of America's most advanced jet fighters. Judy Resnik will be the second American woman to leave the Earth's atmosphere. Steve Hawley is married to the first American spacewoman, and engineer Charles Walker's employers paid $80,000 for his place on the shuttle. Before dawn, the 5 men and 1 woman set out from the Space Center buildings for the very first stage of their journey, the bus ride to the waiting shuttle and its rocket. But that's as far as they got. Only 9 minutes away from the end of the long countdown, there was a hitch. One of the computers was giving trouble and the launch was cancelled.
We ran a quick test called a built-in test routine into that computer, and the indication came back is that we have a serious hardware failure. And that is as much as we really know now.
The launch was stopped with less than half an hour to go. The fault in the backup system was found by the crew, by then strapped in their seats. A spare has now been cannibalized from the shuttle's sister ship Challenger. Launch control at the Kennedy Space Center at Cape Canaveral say repairs can be carried out in time, but that won't necessarily mean Discovery's maiden voyage begins tomorrow.
Say because of a computer doing its job.
We have a go for auto sequence start. Discovery's 4 redundant computers now taking over primary control of critical vehicle functions through liftoff.
Everything was go for liftoff. The ignition sequence had started. The main engines, which burn half a ton of fuel a second, were about to be ignited.
10. We have a go for main engine start. 7, 6, 5. We have main engine start. We have a cutoff. We have an abort by the onboard computers of the orbiter Discovery.
1/10 of a second after the firing of the first of the 3 engines, a computer received a signal that a valve had failed, and it automatically shut everything down. That shutdown occurred 4 seconds before the solid rocket boosters were due to ignite. These are the large white rockets beneath the shuttle. Once ignited, there is no way of shutting them down. They burn for 2 minutes, providing the main boost for liftoff. If they had gone off, the shuttle's commander would have had to attempt one of the most difficult maneuvers ever tried in a spacecraft, to fight the shuttle back down to a landing close to the launch pad. A fire broke out in the main engine's compartment. It took 3 attempts to extinguish it. The shuttle's external fuel tank has more than 500,000 gallons of liquid hydrogen and oxygen, a highly explosive mixture. The 6 astronauts aboard the shuttle were not harmed in the incident, but it could lead to a lengthy postponement in the maiden flight of Discovery.
First on BBC One, John Craven's News Round.
Grounded by computer failure, America's new shuttle. Hello again. America's new space shuttle, Discovery, hit trouble today, only half an hour before she was due to blast off on her maiden flight. The countdown at Kennedy Space Center on Cape Canaveral had to be halted when technicians found that Discovery's 5 computers weren't working together. Mission Control announced the launch would have to be postponed. For the 6-member crew, it means at least a day's delay. They include America's 2nd woman astronaut and the shuttle's 1st paying passenger. Newsround space editor Reg Turnhill reports.
No chances were taken with Discovery, 3rd and most important of the shuttle fleet, because next year it's due to start making military flights around the poles instead of the equator. The crew, who boarded full of confidence this morning, were strapped in their seats for 3 hours, but they'll get another chance tomorrow or Wednesday. Their main job on this mission is to use weightlessness to make 3 litres of very pure medicine. Human volunteers will try the medicine as soon as Discovery gets back. And to make it, a famous drugs firm is paying £60,000 for the shuttle's first paying passenger. He's been working with NASA for so long, they agreed to take him after a total of only 6 days training. His name's Charles Walker, a 36-year-old computer engineer, and he's very popular with the astronauts. Judy Resnik, America's 2nd woman astronaut, will be helping him. Once Discovery is launched, the crew's first job will be to spin out Frisbee-style a new communications satellite. And then it'll be Judy's job to unfurl, like a concertina, a 10-story-high solar panel to gather electricity from the sun. If it works, it'll enable the shuttle on future missions to stay up for weeks instead of days. If it gets stuck, 2 astronauts will have to spacewalk to cut it free.
Failure in its backup flight computer. It was replaced with a computer from the Shuttle Challenger, and technicians worked through the night to get it ready for today's launch from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The mission is to last for 7 days, and it'll be carrying the shuttle's first fare-paying passenger, whose ticket to space and back was £60,000 return.
Now on BBC One, John Craven's News Round.
Fire on the launch pad. The Space Shuttle Discovery fails to blast off. Hello again. With only 4 seconds to blast off, the maiden flight of America's new space shuttle was called off for the 2nd time. Computers automatically shut down Discovery's engines, and the launch had to be aborted when part of the shuttle seemed to be on fire. Never before has a shuttle launch had to be stopped so close to liftoff. Mission Control at the Kennedy Space Center at Cape Canaveral took immediate emergency action to stop Discovery from bursting into flames. Newsround space editor Reg Turnhill has been watching the dramatic pictures.
Go for main engine start. 7, 6, 5. We have main engine start. We have an abort by the onboard computers of the orbiter Discovery.
3 times fire broke out in Discovery's tail, and 3 times launch control deluged it with water to put it out. It was a tense half hour for everybody, until the danger was past that the fire would spread to the thousands of tons of fuel in the rockets needed to get the shuttle off the ground. We could hear the crew shutting down the systems, helping launch control to make things safe. They must have been wondering whether, for the first time in America's space history, they'd have to make an emergency exit down the slide wire. It's not known yet whether it was another computer fault that shut down Discovery's 3rd engine only 4 seconds from liftoff, or whether the engine itself was faulty. That isn't likely, because all 3 engines have been used before, on Challenger and Columbia. The recovery team didn't waste any time getting the crew out. First, Judy Resnik was hauled out unceremoniously without her space helmet, followed by the 5 men. Water was still being sprayed over the whole launch pad as they hurried away. No one knows how long Discovery will be grounded until they can find out what went wrong. But it will be at least 2 days, and very likely much longer.
Has been abandoned only moments before liftoff. Yesterday it was a computer that went wrong. This time another computer averted a potential disaster. There were just 4 seconds of the countdown remaining when the computer sensed that one of the shuttle's main engines had failed to ignite. The computer automatically shut down the other 2, but not before a fire had started on the launch pad.
The faulty computer that frustrated yesterday's takeoff had been replaced with an older unit, hastily removed from the orbiter Challenger, one of Discovery's 2 shuttle predecessors. With all now apparently well aboard the shuttle and its rocket, the crew, the 2nd American woman to go into space, and 5 men, took the ritual last breakfast before liftoff, as relaxed as it's possible to be in the circumstances. The long countdown was uninterrupted, and at 8:44 in the morning, local time, it looked as if Discovery was on its way.
10. We have a go for main engine start. 7, 6, 5. We have main engine start. We have a cutoff. We have an abort by the onboard computers of the orbiter Discovery.
After a brief burst of flame, the shuttle's own computers detected that one of the engines had failed to ignite, and it shut the others down. There was a brief moment of confusion as flight crew and ground control caught up with the computer's lightning decisions. Then there were several deluges of water as liquid hydrogen fuel spilling from the engine nozzles burned furiously. Then it was all over. Judy Resnik and her 5 colleagues were stuck on the ground, this time not just for 24 hours, but while engineers began immediately to track down the fault that kept them there, it was announced that it may be several days, perhaps even a week.
One of the spacecraft's 3 main engines failed, and the launch was stopped automatically by a computer. Discovery's first flight has now been put off indefinitely.
Yesterday's launch was postponed because of a computer failure. Today, the shuttle and possibly the lives of the 6 astronauts aboard were saved because of a computer doing its job.
We have a go for auto sequence start. Discovery's 4 redundant computers now taking over primary control of critical vehicle functions through liftoff.
Everything was go for liftoff. The ignition sequence had started. The main engines, which burn half a ton of fuel a second, were about to be ignited.
10. We have a go for main engine start. 7, 6, 5. We have main engine start. We have a cutoff. We have an abort by the onboard computers of the orbiter Discovery.
1/10 of a second after the firing of the first of the 3 engines, a computer received a signal that there had been a valve failure, and it automatically shut off everything. That shutdown occurred 4 seconds before the solid rocket boosters were due to ignite. These are the large white rockets beneath the shuttle. Once ignited, there is no shutting them down. They burn for 2 minutes, providing the main boost for liftoff, taking the shuttle to a height of 25 miles. The commander of the shuttle would then have to switch on every engine available to take him to a height of 75 miles to give him enough room to maneuver and fight the shuttle back to a landing close to the launch pad, dropping the fuel tank just before landing, the most difficult space maneuver ever tried. A fire broke out in the main engine compartment. It took 3 attempts to extinguish it. The shuttle's external fuel tank has more than 500,000 gallons of liquid hydrogen and oxygen, a highly explosive mixture. The 6 astronauts aboard the shuttle were not harmed by the incident in any way, but it could lead to a lengthy postponement in the maiden flight of Discovery.
Finally, some of the planes that defended Britain over 40 years ago were stooging around today at an old RAF station in Essex, recreating the dogfights of World War II.
The frontline fighter base at North Weald, which had its fair share of scrambles during World War II, has remained quiet for years. Today, the roar of overhead planes returned. The chase was on as dogfights filled the air once more. All the old familiar names were chasing the German foe, the Mustang, the Kitty Hawk, and the Spitfire, now a collector's piece.
Spitfire ahead, turning in behind him. Follow me behind. Contact on the Spitfire, closing 100 yards, coming in for the kill. Turning hard left. Bandit coming onto your tail, number 2, watch it. Coming in hard, behind the Spitfire, looking in, closing into range, and firing now.
With agility and pride, they went through their paces.
Spitfire, stand by to break away. Stand by to break away.
And their final spectacular sortie, a simulated ground attack, bringing back more than a few memories for the old fighter station. Terry Lloyd, News at 10, North Weald.
And that's it tonight.
Delays. After 3 attempts over the past 2 months, it was at last all systems are go.
31 seconds, we have a go for auto sequence start.
Even this launch was delayed by 7 minutes when 2 planes flew dangerously near the launch pad.
T-minus 20 seconds and counting.
T-minus 15.
T-minus 15. T-minus 11. 10. We have a go for main engine start. 6. We have main engine start. 3, 2, 1. We have SRB ignition and we have liftoff. Liftoff of mission 41-D, the first flight of the orbiter Discovery, and the shuttle has cleared the tower.
Roll in. Roger, roll.
Mission control confirms roll maneuver. Standing by to throttle down to 65% to begin passing through the period of maximum aerodynamic pressure. Standing by for SRB separation.
50.
Crew reports PC less than 50. SRB separating.
Roger, staging. The satellite is powered up and configured and everything looks real good on board.
Discovery Houston, it looks good to us also, Steve. Your go for the deploy.
Discovery, roger, go for deploy.
Discovery Houston, good news, Steve. We're watching it and a lot of smiles down here.
A little bit of a thump when it deployed.
This shuttle mission is expected to last 6 days, with the landing in California on Wednesday. Space Shuttle Discovery are carrying out experiments with solar energy aimed at revolutionizing space travel. They've unfurled a 100-foot sail, seen here in a simulation, which could eventually harness the sun's energy to power future flights. Now the real thing, filmed from Discovery. The crew will spend much of their remaining 3 days in space testing how the sail affects the shuttle. Mission Control at Houston say the first experiments were highly promising.
Shuttle Discovery has successfully launched its 3rd communications satellite and begun experiments with a solar sail. The satellite left Discovery without a hitch. The 3 satellites were the biggest space cargo ever carried by a shuttle.
Congratulations.
Then the crew unfurled the solar sail above Discovery's cargo bay. It's 102 feet fully extended, as tall as a 10-story building. It's hoped energy from the sail will be able to power future shuttle missions. And that's all from us. We'll be back at 10 o'clock. I hope you can join us then. The crew of the American Space Shuttle Discovery have successfully unfurled the giant solar sail, which it's hoped will help to power future shuttle missions. Fully extended, it's 102 feet long, as high as a 10-story building. Earlier, Discovery launched its 3rd communications satellite into space. The cargo of 3 satellites is the biggest ever carried by a shuttle. Today, with Russian aircraft on display for the first time, the Soviets are particularly keen to swap helicopter technology with the West.
The Russians made their Farnborough debut with the largest helicopter in the world. Most aircraft at this year's show have been seen here before, so this giant, which can lift 20 tons, will be a focus of attention. Smaller helicopters are much in evidence this year too. Ground displays boast remarkable arrays of weapons that can be carried by them. Their military importance is prompting tough competition for orders. The theme of this year's Farnborough could almost be, if you want to get a contract, get a partner. The Royal Air Force is looking for a new large helicopter. And to try to get the order, the American Sikorsky company, which builds this Black Hawk, has teamed up with Short Brothers of Belfast. And Short Brothers want to build another foreign plane, the Brazilian Tucano, to fulfill a contract for 150 new basic trainers for the RAF. British Aerospace is in harness too, with a Swiss company for the same contract. Fighting this international competition is the all-British Firecracker. Britain's airship industries are displaying their bigger Skyship, about to be certified to carry passengers. It attracts great interest, but has yet to find a big market. For the far-off future, British Aerospace have a model of their proposal for a reusable space plane. They want the British government to take more interest in space, but admit their HOTOL project would cost too much for Britain alone and would need collaboration from Europe or America. Jeffrey Archer, ITN at Farnborough.
A plan for a spacewalk to remove the ice later today has been called off. It could still happen tomorrow. NASA are increasingly worried that a chunk of ice could break off during the landing and damage the craft.
They described it as an extremely heavy landing.
Throughout the day, there had been a strong, blustery crosswind at Farnborough, always a hazard for pilots. But when Bill Loverseed took the Buffalo up for its 2-minute display, there was no sign that anything was wrong until he made a steep approach to show off the plane's ability to land on very short airstrips. Almost immediately, it was clear he was descending too quickly.
Dash 7 coming back, Tom Appleton. Running in.
The fact that there was no prolonged fire was partly because display aircraft carry very little fuel aboard, and partly due to the plane's own fire extinguishing equipment. This was the first crash at a Farnborough air show for some years, and the fact that no one was hurt showed the sense behind the strict safety rules. These stress that pilots must not fly over the spectators and must keep within the airfield perimeters. It also says much for the Buffalo's inherent strength that the pilots walked away unhurt. The accident will be the subject of an inquiry by the Transport Ministry's Accident Investigation Branch, who are based at Farnborough.
The American Air Force today rolled out its newest bomber, the B1B. It's capable of dropping nuclear bombs on Soviet targets, but it's had its problems. President Carter had cancelled the program when he was in office, and last week a prototype aircraft crashed. From California, Brian Barron.
All prototypes are grounded because of last week's crash, but still, the first production model was rolled out with a fanfare. The most expensive plane ever built, each B1 bomber cost £150 million. A swing-wing, ground-hugging bomber that's one of the cornerstones of the Reagan defense buildup.
Critics have said it couldn't be done, but today we're all here to do it. We're rolling out the first B1B. 5 months ahead of schedule, within budget. And as we roll it out, ladies and gentlemen, may we do so with a prayer to God on our lips. May it never fly in anger.
Among the delighted onlookers, actor James Stewart, who's a general in the Air Force Reserve. There too, the widow of B1 test pilot Doug Benefield, who was killed last week. The Air Force is still investigating why that B1 crashed in the Mojave Desert. The crew got out in a parachute escape capsule, but the impact was so great the pilot died and his 2 colleagues were seriously hurt. The crash will delay the development of air launching of cruise missiles from the B1, but today the general in charge seems super confident.
So although this was an upset, our confidence in the overall weapon system still runs very high.
In the unlikely event of President Reagan being defeated in the election, the B1 could be in trouble again with the Democratic administration. But it's probably too far advanced now to halt again. And the Pentagon has a powerful argument up its sleeve that the Russians are flight testing their own equivalent called the Blackjack.
The American astronauts aboard the Shuttle Discovery have managed to dislodge the piece of troublesome ice. Since Sunday, it's been blocking the waste pipes from the spacecraft's lavatory. Today, the crew used Discovery's robot arm to chip it away and, they hope, ensure a safe landing tomorrow.
The crew of the American Space Shuttle Discovery are now busy preparing for their return to Earth after successfully getting rid of a large icicle that formed on the side of their craft. The icicle had put the shuttle's toilet out of action and could have caused big problems on Discovery's return voyage. She's due to touch down in America tomorrow afternoon. Here's our space editor, Reg Turnell, with more details.
Most of Discovery's giant icicle was knocked off with one blow of the robot arm, delivered by the commander, Hank Hartsfield. Vague pictures like this from the arm's TV camera were all he had to guide him. It's been a great relief. If the icicle had still been there during re-entry, it could have broken off and damaged the heat-shielding tiles on Discovery's tail. But the crew still can't use the toilet, so they're coming home tomorrow, even though their work isn't finished. The men can manage, but it's become very difficult for America's second woman in space, Judy Resnik. However, Mission Control has already declared Discovery's first flight a great success, and tomorrow's landing at 1:39 our time will once again be in the Californian desert at Edwards Air Force Base.
At the Farnborough Air Show, there's been a lucky escape for the two-man crew of a plane which crashed late this afternoon. The aircraft, a de Havilland Canada Buffalo like this one, was taking part in a flying display when the accident happened. Rescue vehicles were on the scene within seconds. In Chicago, a 28-year-old printer has won the world's biggest ever lottery prize of $40 million. That's about £30 million. The lottery is a game of chance played all over America. Bob Friend reports.
The odds, 3.5 million to 1. And this, not surprisingly, is how 28-year-old Michael Witkowski reacted when he found he'd beaten them.
I screamed, I got it, and I jumped up and I handed it to my sister's future husband, and he said, "Get away from me." And I said, "Look at the ticket."
The lottery built up to the record figure because no one had won during the last few weeks. In homes and bars, people waited nervously for the results.
Worth $40 million to a single winner.
Mr. Witkowski says he'll split his winnings with his family. And his job? He's a printer. In a firm, wait for it, that prints checks.
Doctors at Harefield Hospital in London say their young heart transplant patient is continuing to make very good progress. 14-year-old Adrian Walton got up for breakfast this morning and has been using his exercise cycle. He hopes to be able to go outside soon. Adrian, who's Britain's second youngest heart transplant patient, received his new heart on Saturday. He's one of 3 people who have had the operation in the past few days. All 3 are said to be doing well. Scientists at Cape Canaveral in America are confident that the Space Shuttle Discovery will now blast off tomorrow, 1 day later than planned. Today's launch had to be postponed after a fault was found in Discovery's main computer. Here's our space editor Reg Turnell with more details, and a first look at the space station America is planning for the 1990s.
Discovery's 6 crew members hadn't been woken when the trouble was found, so they were left to sleep on. There was a fault in the automatic system, which soon after launch must jettison the rocket boosters and huge fuel tank. Discovery would crash if they didn't fall cleanly away. Meanwhile, NASA has just announced some exciting plans for the future, beginning with the huge space station now being designed. An astronaut doing repair work on this artist drawing shows the size of the 130-metre-long station when it's fully assembled about 1991. Solar wings developed from the one Discovery is trying out in the next few days will gather electricity from the sun. Up to 8 crew members will live in these 5 modules and change over every 3 months. NASA is hoping Europe's space agency will make one of the modules, costing over £1,000 million. But Europe would sooner provide a free-flying platform orbiting alongside the station. That's much better for making microchips and space medicine because the station itself vibrates as the astronauts move around. Once the station is assembled, NASA tell me, they're planning to use it to establish a permanent manned base on the moon, and after that use it as a starting point for a manned expedition to explore the planet Mars. That'll be early next century.
Hello, the American Space Shuttle Discovery touched down right on time and in excellent weather conditions this afternoon. Scientists at Mission Control are relieved that the landing went so well. There had been fears that an oxygen leak in the final hours in orbit could have caused problems. Thousands gathered at Edwards Air Force Base in California to see the landing. 30 miles from the runway, Discovery could be seen firing her powerful jets as she made her approach. Mission Control kept a careful watch as the shuttle descended.
Altitude 300 feet.
Suddenly, she was clearly visible through the early morning sun around the desert lake bed at Edwards Air Force Base. Her wheels touched down bang on time. Discovery's first mission had been almost perfect. She'd successfully launched 3 communications satellites into space. This has put NASA firmly back into the race to see who will win orders to send future satellites into space. The only real problem on the mission was the icicle that formed on the side of the craft. Getting rid of that had cost the crew valuable time. They usually like to have a clear day to prepare for landing, and so they must have been under pressure to be ready for today's return to Earth. After the landing, the crew will all be examined by a special doctor to check that they're fit and well, and the experiments they carried out in space will be taken to the laboratories and analysed. Once Discovery's wheels had finally come to a halt, there was a welcome home for the crew.
Wheels stop. Welcome home.
It was a moment of celebration at the end of a successful mission.
The Soviet President, Mr. Chernenko, appeared in public for the first time in 8 weeks today, an answer to suggestions that he was too ill to appear in public. Soviet television showed him walking unaided to a ceremony to honor the crew of the space station Salyut 7. Mr. Chernenko said his invitation to the United States for talks about weapons in space was, after all, still open. On Monday, a Soviet official had said talks were impossible.
The Space Shuttle Discovery came home to a perfect touchdown in California today. The astronauts had delivered 3 satellites to orbit, dealt with an embarrassing icicle, and given nothing away about the secret medical drug they manufactured on board.
Discovery's maiden flight has been a great success. It's restored confidence in the shuttle as a dependable satellite launching vehicle.